Chapter 409, Separated. As they drew closer and closer, the speck of blue light expanded further and further, and Han Li and the others were gradually able to see the entire thing. It was indeed a blue spatial vortex, and it was releasing very similar energy fluctuations to the vortex that they had just entered through. All of a sudden, the space up above abruptly shuddered, following which all of the snowflakes in the sky were rendered completely stationary. Immediately thereafter, the snowflake converged to form a giant snow dragon that was over 1,000 feet thick, swooping down upon everyone with tremendous power. A resounding boom rang out as the blue light barrier around everyone was struck by the snow dragon and was violently shattered. The wind and snow that surged into the broken light barrier had become extremely violent, and it split up everyone in different directions before hurling them high up into the sky. The power released by the exploding snow dragon was so fierce that an extremely violent windstorm was swept up, and everyone was frantically trying to steady themselves in midair. But they were unable to do so, and the gusts of ferocious wind sent them flying away in different directions. Bright azure light emerged over Han Li's body as his thunderstorm wings appeared on his back, and he flapped them with all his might, doing everything in his power to stabilize himself. He was just about to search for Taoist Hu Yan when he spotted a black shadow hurtling rapidly toward him, following which he felt a soft body wrap itself around him. Han Li had only just barely managed to steady himself, but the impact of having someone else crash into him tipped him off balance once again, and he fell involuntarily into a gust of ferocious wind. The world spun rapidly around him, and he didn't get a chance to see who it was that was clinging to him before he fell unconscious. On a vast and windy snowland, the space in this area was far more stable than in the previous area, and the landscape was riddled with massive cedar trees that were covered in snow. There were around a dozen figures standing in front of a cluster of cedar trees, and they were led by none other than Deputy Palace Master Shui Ying of the Northern Glacial Immortal Palace. Even though they were standing together, it was clear that there was some division among them. The Northern Glacial Immortal Palace cultivators were all gathered together, while the 3 Tao Lords of the Blaze Dragon Tao were standing a bit further away. The Immortal Manor will only be open for a year. Why is it that Palace Master Xiao hasn't come to meet up with us? Ouyang Kuishan asked as he took a glance at the snowland around him. We wouldn't have to act so urgently if the location of the Infernal Frost Immortal Manor's entrance hadn't been leaked, Shui Ying said in a cold voice. It was clear that she was suspecting the 3 Tao Lords of leaking the location of the entrance. Ouyang Kushan's expression darkened slightly upon hearing this, and he gave a cold harump before falling silent. The Palace Master is taking care of the people entering the Immortal Manor after us. He's going to send them into the spatial storm to separate them, and that'll make them much easier to deal with. Even if any of them dare to oppose us, we'll be able to divide and conquer them, rather than having to face them all at once, Shui Ying explained. The 3 Tao Lords exchanged a glance with complex looks in their eyes upon hearing this. There was a nameless gray desert that was covered in gray pebbles of different sizes. The desert was completely devoid of vegetation, and there were patches of snow littered across the landscape. At the center of the desert was a winding channel that had seemingly been bored into the ground over time by flowing streams of melted snow, and there were some ponds of different sizes inside, the surfaces of which had all been frozen solid. Laying beside the channel on the trunk of a fallen cedar tree were a pair of unconscious figures, one male and one female. The man was laying face down on the ground, so it was impossible to glean his appearance, while the woman was extremely beautiful. At this moment, the woman's arms were wound firmly around the man's waist, while her face was pressed tightly against his side, presenting a rather intimate sight to behold. Right at this moment, the man suddenly shuddered before regaining consciousness. He turned over before getting up into a seated position, then began inspecting his surroundings with a slightly disoriented look on his face. The man was none other than Han Li in disguise, and at this moment, there was no one else with him aside from the young woman that was clinging to his side. Taoist Hu Yan, Yun Ni, and the others were all nowhere to be seen. fellow Taoist Lu. Han Li called out as he patted the woman on the shoulder with a layer of azure light over the palm of his hand. The woman was none other than Lu Yuqing, and she gave a muffled groan before also regaining consciousness. After taking a glance at Han Li, she inspected her surroundings with a dazed expression while massaging her own temples as she asked, "Where are we, Brother Liu?" Han Li didn't immediately reply. Instead, he began to inspect his surroundings with his spiritual sense and his bright sight spirit eyes. A short while later, he withdrew his gaze as he said, "We're definitely still in the infernal frost immortal manor, but I don't know exactly where we are." "Where is everyone else? Why are we the only ones here?" Lu Yuqing asked with a puzzled expression. "It seems like we were attacked earlier and swept up into a spatial storm that separated everyone. It appears we're the only two to have ended up here," Han Li replied with a wry smile. Only after hearing this did Lu Yuqing recall how she had clung desperately to Han Li in a blind panic during the storm, and a faint blush immediately appeared on her face. "What do we do now?" she hurriedly asked in order to mask her own embarrassment. Han Li fell into deep thought upon hearing this. The original plan was for everyone to travel together, so he still didn't get a chance to ask Taoist Hu Yan about the internal layout of the immortal manor. "I scoured the area with my spiritual sense just now, and there are no clear spiritual power fluctuations nearby. However, the further we go in that direction, the lower the air temperature becomes," Han Li said as he pointed in a certain direction. "In that case, that's where we should go. That should be the first area of the infernal frost immortal manor, the light frost region," Lu Yuqing said. "How do you know about this, fellow Taoist Lu?" Han Li asked as he turned to Lu Yuqing with a puzzled expression. "As I said earlier, our Black Wind Island discovered the entrance of the infernal frost immortal manor even earlier than the northern glacial immortal palace. And even though we've been ordered to keep everything about the immortal manor secret, my father still conducted a great deal of research into the immortal manor in advance," Lu Yuqing explained. A peculiar look appeared on Han Li's face as he asked, "In that case, was it your father that leaked the location of the immortal manor's entrance in secret?" This was not just a completely baseless theory from Han Li. Black Wind Island had guarded the entrance of the immortal manor for the northern glacial immortal palace for many years, yet they had received no reward at all for their efforts, and not even a single one of the immortal palace's 12 spots had been granted to them. As a result, Lu Yuqing had no choice but to implore Han Li to request a spot for her from Taoist Hu Yan, and only then was she able to enter the infernal frost immortal manor. Lu Yuqing was terrified to hear this, and she hurriedly waved her hands as she denied. "Please don't make such damning accusations. Brother Liu, we wouldn't dare to do something like that. If the immortal palace pins the blame on us, then our entire island runs the risk of being wiped out." Han Li had no intention of pursuing this matter, and he smiled as he reassured, "Don't worry, I was just curious. I didn't mean to cause any alarm." The location of the immortal manor's entrance being leaked was a positive development for Han Li, and he didn't care who it was that had leaked this information. Even though he had joined forces with Taoist Hu Yan and the True Flame sect, they still couldn't compare with the likes of the Northern Glacial Immortal Palace and the Dawnfall sect. In the wake of the location of the entrance being leaked, many powers had been able to get involved, thereby completely muddying the waters, and that could only benefit people like Han Li. After a brief moment of contemplation, Han Li took a glance into the distance, then swept a hand through the air to summon an azure flying boat with 4 azure wings on either side. "Let's go. There's no point in staying here any longer," he said to Lu Yuqing, then flew onto the spirit boat. Lu Yuqing nodded in response before also springing up into the air and landing on the flying boat behind Han Li. The flying boat then sped away as a streak of azure light at Han Li's behest. There was a blanket of dark clouds hanging in the sky at a low altitude, giving the entire area a rather oppressive atmosphere. It was a very bleak and desolate area, with no living creatures in sight, nor any sounds to be heard aside from that of the passing wind. After flying for a few minutes, snowflakes suddenly began to drift through the air. Initially, the snow was quite sparse, but as they continued onward, the snowfall became heavier and heavier. At the same time, the environment beneath them gradually began to change. As they left the gray desert behind, they arrived on a vast ice field. The clouds in the sky had darkened significantly, and the snowflakes drifting through the air also appeared significantly heavier than before, falling from the sky thick and fast. Thankfully, this area wasn't filled with the same intense cold as the initial area that they had arrived in upon entering the Immortal Manor, and the layers of protective spiritual light over their bodies were sufficient to keep them warm.